Alright, so here we are moving into the 1755 turn, and this is of course the last turn of this sixth period. One more period to go. We've got an election to the Holy Roman Empire. We have some deaths. Both France and Russia had a royal death and a dynastic crisis. We got new leaders for them. Let's see. We got here Russia has a 598, a really excellent diplomat. Of course, not right now because of the crisis that halves their rating. And France got a 665, kind of an average sort of guy. England also had a death, but not a crisis. They had a fragile health and then rolled again. You could only get fragile health on a 10, and then you got to roll another 10 to get what they got, which is a baby. Really bad combination. On top of that, they got a crisis of madness. Essentially, this reduces England's values all to a 1 for this turn. Actually, they drop below that. And because of the fragile and the madness, it's going to make the king less likely to survive. They can't have... that's about as bad as it can go for the English. However, they got a pretty good leader, a 686, again, a high diplomacy. Beyond that, nothing happened. We got some extension to the revolt and essentially 2 destabilization events that had absolutely no effect, very low rolls. And so we're kind of left with what's sitting there, which is the French, the possibility of, the election to the Holy Roman Empire, which we have to handle during the diplomacy, and this continuing war between Spain, Russia, and Turkey, and then the wars between Poland, Russia, and Austria. Remember, Prussia's dropped out of that one, grabbing its spoils already. Actually, grabbing better than its spoils. Other than that, not much. Well, after the French enormous success last time, and the fact that they had the papacy, they went for the 3 ecclesiastical states and nothing else. They got 1 of them. They needed 2. It's not enough. Austrians are now the emperor. Get the 10 points instead of 20 because it's the Austrians, but they do get the 75 ducats, which is very helpful. They basically got this for free. They didn't contest. So the dynastic crisis, one can kind of spin this story, hey, that, without it translating to the son of the same king, well, it became a harder choice. Otherwise, there was a little bit of diplomatic action, but not as much as before because so many weak rulers. It seems like the money might be spent better elsewhere, and the French had to spend a little bit on this. They probably should have spent more. What we did see is Scotland fall out of the French camp and into an English royal marriage. This French paid enough to try to defend themselves, and actually they had the better odds. It was 3-2, but the English rolled very well and ended up actually moving the Scots. And otherwise, the Spanish grabbed themselves something new, the Saxons, in military alliance, which gets them a quick victory point, and the French lost one. No movement, though, on the war fronts. Nobody wants to start a war right now, and nobody wanted to add to one. Before I move into the actual economic phase, the actual administrative phase, I want to go into a little bit of highlighting of some of what went on. The French decided finally to compete with the English down here, and they took they provided slaves to Montreal. They have an increase in their amount of slaves available, and they challenged Spain and ended up buying the majority of the slaves at this point. That's going to be a very random situation. Basically, by agreeing, they could guarantee 1, but now they got 3 instead of 2, or whatever. But they put a challenge against the English here, and they ended up losing 2 levels at Montreal. The English ended up losing 1 level. That means a lot less tobacco was actually produced because of the competition, at least in terms of what the effect is here. I'm not sure how much that really makes sense. To me, competition probably means the additional amounts should have been produced, but you don't get the cash for them or something like that. I don't know. It should drive the prices down, I would think, but it doesn't in the long run. And it certainly affects the income badly in the short run. At least that's the way I read it. I'm not going to worry too much about looking up the rules for something like this. Anyway, so we're seeing a decrease in the total productivity beyond the effect on the actual tobacco, though. So, the French kind of learned their lesson. Now they have to reinvest to improve Montreal again. Yeah, Montreal in the deep south. In order, to get it back up to where they were, where they had a fortress, etc. So that's kind of problematic for them. Likewise, though, the English lost a level up here, which they're going to also have to invest in. So there's these problems with opening up competition, where it's really not what you want to do. If you can come to some sort of agreement, you might be safer, or even not even play in the competition realm, because it's kind of, a risky thing to have happen. Another thing on the economic phase, we can see where the prices have gone. Slaves are all the way up to 8. The biggies, spices and product of the Orient, have dropped so far due to the production and just bad rolling, basically, because they could stay even. If products of the Orient pushes above 20, it'll be down here again, where it won't go down. It'll go up, if anything, and rather quickly. Weirdness about the way the charts work. The big secondary products, tobacco, sugar, cotton, they're all up there now, and making the slave investment still worthwhile. At some point, slaves get so valuable that you don't want to ship them to colonies. You just want to sell them because you can make more money. But once the colonies get up to level 6 and they can produce an extra product, so it costs 2 slaves to produce products for a plus side colony. If that plus side colony is only a level 4 or 5, it's only going to produce 2 products, and you'd lose money there. You'd be paying $16 to produce 14, say. But if you're producing 3, you pay $16 to produce 21, you make a few extra bucks. Is it worth it? Probably not when there's competition, except, hey, I can hurt my opponents by doing this too. And if anything, France has enough money. And they have enough colonies, to be frank. But, so they kind of judge, hey, it's worth it for us to kind of play around there, just like it's worth it for them to play around with the competition in the English sea zones, largely because they don't have anywhere else to go. Everywhere is claimed by the English, or else there's something annoying like a pirate sitting around. Down here, well, there are English there, just like there are English here. These guys, though, are invisible, which is, they're off the board. The English still have a lot of fleets that aren't placed yet. And now they're coming into places where they're finding they no longer dominate completely because the French have moved up. In fact, the French still have the monopoly up here in Russia because they were picking areas where the English weren't located right away. And now the English are like, wow, I better reclaim that trade that I've got stocked up invisibly. But it means there's competitions there too. So you don't gain as much even if you win the competitions. And you can see they're kind of splitting because they both have the same FTI. That's what you're rolling the competitions against. Anyway, on to the admin. Okay, well, I guess we're ready to go into the rounds. See, the French have done some interesting things. They built another army here in the New World. Now they've got positioning against both the English and the Spanish, including a heavy cav contingent in this army up here. On the west, they also won some competitions out here in the East Indian Ocean, and now they have a complete monopoly there. They're nowhere near. They're a good 10 points behind the leaders, which is the Dutch and the English, in terms of total fleets in position. But I think they're ahead of the English slightly still at this point in terms of how much production they're making off their fleets. And this is a huge bonus. This is going to be more victory points. They're getting a lot of victory points. A lot of it comes from their Mediterranean holdings. Combined, they're probably better than the Dutch. Certainly better than the English. But even just in the rest of the world, the non-Mediterranean part of the map, I think they're a little ahead of the English, but see, here's the problem. I believe their trading fleet ability goes down. The English continue, they go up to 5 trading fleets per turn in this next period, where the French drop, well, no, they stay down at 4. So eventually the English are going to overtake them. And the real question becomes, can the French hold the Mediterranean against that English onslaught? The English want to take the Atlantic because they're not that far from where the Dutch are at this point. They're like 2 points behind in terms of the stuff they don't have on the board right now. But there's a lot they don't have on the board right now. And as long as they're competing with the French, it's kind of coming out not to their advantage overall. The French kind of are just making extra bucks off this. But that means that, well, along with the trade center, the Dutch also have the Indies Orientales because they're still producing, I think, more spices and products of the Orient. The French and English have both been upping their values, though, so I have to check that before next turn. Poland now, without a Prussian enemy, has decided to leave the defensive stance and went for an offensive, and they got 3 detachments. They're primarily going to throw them against the Austrians at this point. Hope they can gain some points, maybe drive Austria out of that war, perhaps with an easy, hey, I just want Krakow, whatever. This is the weakness for Prussia. If Poland does not have the Confederation of the Bar, Russia gets huge chunks of Poland. But it's going to be tough for Russia to defeat Poland, especially while they're at war with the Turks here. And that's kind of a disturbing situation. They're not going to obviously get the Crimea out of this, which they had kind of been hoping for. All right, on to the rounds. Not even done with the first round here, but I wanted to highlight some stuff that happened. So to begin with, the Spanish are doing sort of a multi-pronged situation because the Turks managed to gather the Turkish and Algerian fleets and show this Muslim navy that was very, very frightening to them. They competed with it with Moncada's fleet over here in order to pin it down, and then slipped Cordoba from the New World up here to drop a siege on Algeria, as well using the Genoese here to maintain the siege that's going on here in Sardinia. Meanwhile, the Turks marched up to face the Russians, but the exciting stuff happened in Poland. Now remember, there were 2 armies in Poland, over here in Warsaw and here in the marshes. The Warsaw army came down and drove Brown out of Krakow, but was almost demolished in doing so. Then Brown took something like 40% casualties in the attrition, so his army's in pretty bad shape too. Following that up, we had Daun, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, marching from here, going up to face the army in the Pripyat Marshes, which would be a conscript army. Combined interception from the 2 Polish armies caught them, and the Austrians completely destroyed the Polish army. Now remember, the Austrians have good leaders. That's the big advantage here. But they also have an additional +1 due to the technological advantage that they have. The Poles are all the way down here now, while the Austrians are up here with the Latin group. The Poles have slipped out of the Latin group and into the Orthodox group, and that makes them much worse technologically. They're in the same fire tables and everything. They're at the same technology. It's just there's that +1 difference, which can be pretty major. The Turks are also facing that problem against both Spain and Russia. Anyway, long story short, the Polish army is gone, completely gone. And it looks to me like Austria is going to be able to continue capturing territories and maybe be able to get a piece of its liking, getting maybe 3 territories if they're lucky, rather than just Krakow, not going for the defeat of Warsaw, which is going to leave Russia in kind of some tricky situation where it's facing Poland alone. Of course, as we see, the Polish army isn't what it used to be. But Russia would like Warsaw just because it's an easier way out. It's just nobody's going to do it for them. And, well, they may have to grab their own territories instead. Alright, after a second round we saw some more excitement going on. The English shipped Wolfe over here into the Antilles, St. Thomas or whatever it is, and he was driven back, which isn't that unlikely. An island is hard to attack when it's got troops on, and that one's got revolting troops. I don't know if you noticed, the English succeeded down here. Over here, the Spanish did some little end run type action to run over to Capalia, and they kind of did a standoff here with the Genoese fleet, so they're still operating in this area. This is just kind of a weird little mess. Turks are moving closer and closer, but Donetsk has fallen. I'm not sure what that frees up with the Russians, and the Austrians are doing nasty things to the Russians, trying to grab the Ukraine, which is a very valuable province, obviously, and if they can take it, they can kind of cut off Russian expansion into Polish territory. They may end up keeping Poland alive by taking the wrong things. This is what happens when wars with Poland erupt. When the Confederation of the Bar type situation comes into play and the wrong territories fall the way that I'm implying it. There's a good chance that the Austrians are going to end up getting the Ukraine and being able to take it as one of their picks. Alright, as we slide into round 5, the English have finally managed to establish Wolfe. He's destroyed the troops there, and he's beginning to start on an anti-rebel campaign. So we get the French beginning to establish colony there. Over here, the Austrians haven't been making any headway, but the Turks gambled everything on one last shot into Donetsk. Basically, they feel they're going to pretty much have to do an unconditional surrender. It's going to be a piece of level 5 the way things are working out, unless they could sway things. So they had to make an attack across into Donetsk. They were defeated there, and, well, that made up for that. But they did try to protect Bessarabia with these Moldavians. Now, they got a problem there. They're down to like 1 strength point. So they're going to have to pull out of there. There's not much they can do. They can't even defend Bug if it comes down to that. This is the closest they can defend with the Wallachians. They can't go more than 1 away from their territory because of their standing. Meanwhile, the Spanish have pushed into Algeria to continue their assaults on that. Just, with the idea that, well, if they can get a peace on Algeria, they can get some additional points, and they can also take some territory. It's not territory they necessarily want too much. I am a little worried about the Austrian plans here. First of all, I noticed they can't just take these 3, which would be, or these 2 and this, which would be optimal. So the problem is, okay, if they have to take Galatia, well, then they have to take Volhynia to keep some kind of contiguity. And that doesn't really help them, because Galatia and Volhynia are from a later division of Poland. I'm not sure. Podesia, I don't think is. I think this is the extent of the Austrian territory. So they should have spread this way instead of the way they did, which is kind of anti-Russian. Chances are, if they do get a success, they'll take these 3 provinces and see what comes of it later. Anyway, on to the next round. Okay, well, that's the end of that. The English weren't able to get any additional ground here. They brought Amherst, the rest of the army, into play, but they weren't able to move anything. And it's okay, it would just escalate back up. Nothing else moved here either. The Austrians still in all their provinces that they were in. So they're not going to gain anything for the new era. The Russians pushed into Bessarabia, but they're not going to get that because they didn't capture it. So what we're looking at when the peace happens, Spain will probably take Sardinia, and, well, Kabylia, if they can't get it directly off the Algerians, if they can, then they can let Turkey pay an indemnity to Russia, which they're in favor of. They want to hurt Turkey, no matter what, pretty much. They're not going to gain anything anywhere else. Malta is going to remain Turkish. Sicily is going to remain divided. All right, well, we'll start the peace and final Edmund type stuff. Okay, so here we are at the end of the turn, and you know, Turkey, although they were able to push themselves up to the -2 space, they decided to surrender anyway. It was peace of level 4. It didn't seem likely they were going to get better than that. Russia was glad to get out of the war. They need to fight against Poland, especially because Austria did get their peace. They took Galicia and Volhynia. They only were able to grab 2 provinces because they failed to capture anything else. That leaves them a problem. They have to go to war with Poland again to get Krakow at some point, unless there's some kind of event that allows you to kind of collect up the rest, whatever that may mean. But right now, Russia has to concentrate on making it to Moscow, or to Warsaw. It says weather's an M, it's Soviet. Never mind. Okay, what did Turkey give up? Well, they gave up the Donetsk, which is kind of interesting because it's kind of floating here on its own under Russia. If Russia doesn't make it to Warsaw and get their success, well, maybe they can connect themselves up with Kharkov. But they have more of a peace advantage if they can make it to Warsaw. If they can get 3 provinces, well, that would help a little, but they'd like to get more than that, and they can by getting there. Spain got Kabylia from Algeria, which knocks Algeria off the Turkish chart, and they also took Sardinia. A lot of new leaders came out. Some leaders died. The French, for example, have a bunch of really kind of crappy naval leaders. Not terrible, but certainly not as good as they've been seeing. And the English, well, they've got some fairly decent ones, at least maneuverability-wise, which might make up for things. It's still not a clear who's got the advantage. We also see Clive showing up in India down here. He's sort of the English good conquistador for the Indian territories. We're going to see a lot of leaders switching around. The troop strengths, everything, all that stuff changes between periods, if you remember from other periods. Anyway, we're going to be pushing into the 1760 turn, but I calculated out the victory points for the specifics. We can see the totals here. One thing you can see is Venice is at like 700 points base, about equivalent to England, and is producing about as much end of period as England. I think, or not Venice, the Habsburgs, the Austrians. I think that actually they made a good move by getting out of the Netherlands. The Netherlands would crank these per turn points, but they were just stuck in an area where their only wars were going to be with France, basically. And by taking the Habsburgs, they're able to fight against these weaker opponents to the east, things like Poland, Turkey, get some serious points in that direction, and their end of turn points are coming out pretty well. I got a couple of minutes so I can look at key events, but I can't go through them all here. The English, for example, didn't manage to get the minor allies bonus. They didn't get all of Britain. France get penalized for Hanover, or they didn't make it for Hanover. They're not the sole producer of fur. They don't have the asiento, and they got their penalty as well that they knew they were going to get. Spain got its bonus in the Empire, but not in the Italies, and they got most sugar in the Americas, and then they got a penalty for the Burgundians. Russia, we knew they weren't going to get the Khanates. That was a bad first pick. It was too hard. They didn't get the they got the port of Bothnia or Baltic and Black Sea, but they didn't get the Bothnia and Baltic. They haven't managed to push into the territory. Well, really what they need is the Swedish territory down here that they just didn't get in and probably won't. And they didn't get Wallachia or Moldavia, either of them. They didn't get their penalty, though, because they had one of the ports. Turkey, they didn't clear the Black Sea. The Russians are in there now in Azov. They didn't get their Peloponnesian War to work. They didn't get the trade center. They didn't get no Christians in North Africa, and they got their penalty for not having the provinces. Austria got its bonus for the Hungarian, Belgrade, the Mediterranean port, the Habsburg Empire. The only thing they got is the penalty they knew they were going to get. Lorraine's absorption, you know, it's a guarantee, and you just didn't want to pick that one because there was no way out of it. Anyway, point-wise, we're definitely seeing the French still holding that big lead, and I don't see any way to catch them. But there's an interesting race between the Austrians and the English. The damage the French did to the English is enough that Austria's got a good shot at second place here. And, well, they might try to convince the English into another anti-French war. Who knows? I don't know if it would go or not. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this one, send it up, and then the beginning of next turn, I'll figure out what the victory point conditions are for the 7th and final period of the game. And there aren't a lot of turns in this one. It's only a 6-turn period. So, yeah, we should be done soon.